This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. We turn now to President Trump's crackdown on immigration. The White House says Colombia has agreed to begin accepting flights of deported migrants to land in Colombia after a dramatic standoff between the U.S. and Colombia unfolded on Sunday, with the Colombian President Gustavo Petro turning back two U.S. military planes that were carrying deported migrants in shackles, saying immigrants should be treated with dignity. President Trump then imposed new tariffs and sanctions on Colombia, 25% tariffs that he said would go up to 50%. Petro responded with retaliatory tariffs on U.S. imports, but within hours, the White House announced a deal had been reached. The standoff with Colombia comes as the Trump administration announces nearly 1,000 people were arrested Sunday as federal agencies carried out immigration raids in Chicago, in Newark, and in other cities. Local communities are pushing back. This comes as the Pentagon sending 1,500 active-duty troops to the U.S. Mexico border, including 500 Marines, where they'll join thousands of National Guard and Reserve forces already deployed there. For more, we're going to Mexico City, where we're joined by Fernando García, founder and executive director of the El Paso, Texas-based Border Network for Human Rights. Fernando, welcome back to Democracy Now! There are so many developments around migration. Talk about the increased militarization on the border for beginning.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me again. Well, we see it again. I mean, this is not the first time that we had seen the deployment of the military, the U.S. military to the border specifically. We had seen it multiple times, but this time it seems that it's a little bit different. And however, we're very, very concerned. We don't know what is going to be the scale and the magnitude of the deployment. As you mentioned, we have at least now 1,500 active duty soldiers being deployed specifically in El Paso, where they're going to be trained at the Fort Bliss military base. Then maybe they're going to be deployed in other parts of the border. But it's very problematic in many ways. As you know, we had incidents in the past where the military has been deployed and they had engaged with civilians, both in the Mexican side of the border, but also on the U.S. side of the border. We had the incidents in 1997 in Redford, Texas, where the Joint Task Force 6 Marine unit killed a U.S. citizen, Ezequiel Hernandez. So that is part of the context what we're seeing right now in this deployment under the Trump administration.
And you're in Mexico City. We usually talk to you in El Paso. Mexico refused to accept a U.S. deportation flight, like Colombia. But then the White House press secretary, Trump's press secretary, tweeted that they then accepted 4 deportation flights. Can you talk about what's happening in Mexico right now and what President Trump's re-establishing the Remain in Mexico edict for migrants trying to cross into the United States?
You know, listen, it is quite unclear what Mexico specifically is going to do. What we know is what the Trump administration is doing. They're trying to implement 2 different processes towards Mexico. The first one is these return flights that we don't know if these are only Mexicans. Obviously, Mexico had said in the past that they're just going to accept Mexican nationals coming back or being returned and deported. But also the other part of the program is what is called the Remain in Mexico. That means even other nationalities, not only Mexicans, would be sent back to border cities such as Ciudad Juarez, close to El Paso, or Tijuana in California. So that is the 2 different programs that are actually being implemented in Mexico. Mexico had said it many times already that they are only going to accept Mexican nationals, and they are not necessarily going to accept the deportation to Mexico of other nationalities. However, that is to be seen. As you have seen already, the United States is putting a lot of pressure in terms of economic terms, tariffs on Colombia and Mexico to accept these new programs that actually failed dramatically in the first administration of Trump, where we have refugee camps along the U.S. Mexico border with no essential services, no legal support, no food, no water for many of the people that is being deported to those border cities.
Before we go, Fernando, there is a lot of reporting on the shock of migrants across the United States and the terrible fear communities are facing. But there's also a lot of pushback and organizing. If you can talk about what's happening with community forums, workshops, Know Your Rights programs, from Eagle Pass to areas in El Paso and others, how you're pushing back.
So we just launched what is called the Community Education Program on constitutional rights. I mean, this is something that we have been doing for many, many years, both at the U.S. Mexico border, but also in the interior of the United States, where we're teaching people about the rights under the Constitution. And I think this is specifically important today because the people right now is having anxiety and fear of not only of detention, deportation, but also of family separation. What we are trying to do with this program is to give people the tools to how to deal with situations where they are confronted with law enforcement, especially with immigration raids, in their homes, in the streets, in their workplaces. And we just reminding people, essentially, that the Constitution of the United States still exists, that under the Fourth Amendment, for example, of the Constitution, they only can allow somebody into their property or house or workplace only with a search warrant or the permission of the owner. Or, for example, if they are confronted and being asked questions by law enforcement, that they have the right to remain silent, that is guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment of the United States. Like those key elements, that's what we're trying to actually tell people, educate them, and organize them around that concept of constitutional rights.
Fernando García, we want to thank you for being with us. We're going to be checking back with you frequently. Founder and executive director of the El Paso, Texas-based Border Network for Human Rights, speaking to us today from Mexico City. We look now at the impact of an executive order President Trump signed on his first day in office that paused the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program in order to see if it, quote, aligns with the interests of the U.S. and should be resumed. Trump's order led to the cancellation of flights for thousands of refugees already approved to come to the U.S., including children and families fleeing war, violence, and persecution. This comes after some 100,000 refugees were settled in the U.S. last year under the program. The order was condemned by the largest refugee resettlement agency in the world, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Vice President J.D. Vance, who is a practicing Catholic, responded Sunday on Face the Nation.
And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line?
The Conference of Catholic Bishops clarified in statement every person resettled through the Refugee Admissions Program is vetted and approved by the U.S. government, and added government funds do not cover the full cost of the services the agency provides. For more, we're going to Baltimore, Maryland, to speak with Krish O'Mara Vignarajah, president of Global Refuge, formerly known as Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. Global Refuge is one of the agencies that received a stop work order on Friday from the Trump administration. Krish, thanks so much for joining us. If you can explain, who are the thousands of refugees all approved to come here, many fleeing persecution in their own countries, but their flights canceled, and then groups like yours, what this means that you've got a stop work order?
I appreciate that question because I do think there's a lot of confusion and conflation around this issue, and I think people are throwing around the word illegal unfairly. So refugee resettlement is a system through which individuals, families, cross an international border. They apply through the United Nations or the U.S. Embassy. They wait literally years to go through extreme vetting, so CIA, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, Interpol, in order to go through these background checks, health clearances. Only when they have cleared those hurdles are they admitted to the United States. These are the select few in that 1% of refugees are ever resettled in their lifetime. And that's the reason why this is the gold standard of legal immigration pathways into the U.S. That is why this program has always had bipartisan support. President Reagan resettled 600,000 refugees during his time in office. And so, you know, for us as the second largest network in the country, it is heartbreaking because we have 6,000 families, children, who did everything we asked them to do. They came to the U.S., they are here, and now we fear that they are stranded because in terms of keeping a roof over their heads, making sure that their children have access to public schools, making sure that they have even access to food. It is a public-private partnership. No one is making money off of this. We work with community groups, churches, in order to support these families. But we fear what the future holds because even for our Afghan allies who worked alongside our military, we don't know how we're going to help them come today and tomorrow, this week, next month.
So explain for the Afghan allies. I mean, for the people coming from Afghanistan, these were the ones who risked their lives helping U.S. troops, saving U.S. soldiers' lives in Afghanistan?
Yeah, so we made a promise to them. We said, look, if you are going to face Taliban retribution, death threats, because you are risking your life, your family's life, by working alongside our military, the U.S. Embassy, to advance our mission, our promise to you is that we will not leave you in harm's way. It is why national security champions are such vocal advocates of the refugee resettlement and the special immigrant visa program, because it's obviously not just the right thing to do to keep our promise to these individuals, but it's the smart thing to do, because the only way we wage a 21st century war is if we have the local support. And so for these Afghan allies, their ability to successfully integrate into our local communities, because they are here, is now in question. And for the allies who we left behind, who the lucky few are able to travel, it's also unclear what happens to them.
So talk about the pushback and how you're organizing. Where are the hubs of refugees who are already living in this country, who groups like yours support, coming from other places?
That's the beauty of this program, is they're not concentrated in one location. They're not in, some democratic city alone. There's a complex algorithm that we work with the State Department. We take into account if they have U.S. family ties. We take into account job market, affordable housing, where there might be a concentration. We work with state refugee coordinators. Candidly, every single concern that was flagged in the executive order is addressed by a program that was designed and fine-tuned over 4 decades to address those concerns. And so they are in the reddest of red states, the bluest of blue states. Local communities work with us and welcome these families because they know that this is such an incredibly powerful program that just reflects the spirit of American generosity.
So, as you've said, this has gotten bipartisan support for years. What's changed?
I wish I knew. I mean, I expected during the election season that we would have some, hateful rhetoric, that we might hear, kind of misstatements. But I expected that in terms of in governing and executing these programs, that there would be a really close look at those programs that are advancing U.S. interests and those that may not. I hope that it's just a matter of taking the time in the transition period to just have a quick understanding of what these programs are. Secretary Rubio obviously has the experience of having come from the Senate, knowing fully well what refugee resettlement is. And so we are hopeful that as people understand the ramifications of not just the executive order, but the work order, that this will be reversed in short order. But I pray that this program does not get caught up in politics.
And how is Global Refuge, your organization, going to operate now?
So we've done this work for 85 years. Our refugee resettlement program began when Lutheran pastors, professors fled Nazi Germany, and it has always been done successfully in partnership with community organizations. And so that is our plea right now, which is if you're interested in volunteering, if you're interested in helping this cause, go to globalrefuge.org. But we're going to have to be crafty in terms of making sure that these families are supported, and making sure that the U.S. keeps its promise to Afghan allies, and making sure that a program that has been really perfected over 4 decades, that we don't accidentally dismantle it.
Krish O'Mara Vignarajah, we want to thank you for being with us, President of Global Refuge, speaking to us from Baltimore.